Hi there, Gautam. Glad you're on board.
But
Webinar is now streaming on live on Facebook, and we have opened the webinar.
okay.
We'll wait for the attendees to come in, and then there'll be a video.
Yes, but it's possible to translate what you say.
Yes.
If you look to the interpretation button at the bottom right of your screen, choose the relevant language for yourself.
Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants who've gathered for this Zoom meeting on the topic of the Paris Commune at its 150th anniversary, its continuing relevance to the workers' movement. So we have a really impressive range of speakers for this session today, and I ask that all the participants, all of the attendees, please keep your microphones on mute until your time comes to speak. Each speaker is going to have 10 minutes to give their presentation. There is interpretation available in the Zoom from French to English, from Bahasa to English, and I think from Spanish to English. The participation of the interpreters is so much appreciated. That's Claude, Herlick, Jeff, Kenya Wan, Triana, and Tagoy. So thank you to you before we start because of the work you're about to do for us. So if you have any questions at any stage that you would like to be putting to the participants, please put it into the chat box in Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, please put your questions in the comments section of the Facebook page. When you're asking a question, please mention the speaker's name that you wish to answer the question. So I'd now like to open the formal part of the program by introducing to you Antonio Turan from the Institute of Political Economy. He is an activist with more than 5 decades of experience. He was a labour organiser with the Light of the Workers Federation starting in 1976, and was involved in the building of the Revolutionary Council of Trade Unions in 1986 in the Philippines. He is an editor of Institute of Political Economy. Please welcome Antonio Tuhan.
To be here with all of you. This is promising to be a wonderful session for us, especially for revolutionary workers' movements. The life of a worker is a constant struggle. It's a struggle to survive. It's a struggle against oppression and exploitation. And it's a struggle to be free of that for social liberation. Then the workers in the 19th century who were involved in the Paris Commune, along with the other workers all over the world, and now continue to struggle. We struggle against oppression, the oppression that dispossesses each worker of life and dignity in different circumstances, and that life of dispossession forces the worker to be ready to become slaves of capital. They become wage slaves of the bourgeoisie. And so workers during the Paris Commune and now fight oppression in various ways to claim their rights, the rights that are denied them, and various struggles against oppression, such as during the Paris Commune. The workers then conducted wild, work stoppages to demand better wages and better working conditions. Up to today, that's still what we are fighting for. But these conditions are the conditions of slavery that constrain workers to live like dogs. We are able to claim our rights in the context of employment, to become slaves, in the context of the rights that are denied us by governments of the bourgeoisie and the capitalists. And therefore, for workers, it is not enough to fight oppression. Workers fight exploitation, meaning to say exploitation, not simply in the question of wages, but the condition of exploitation that is systemic. Exploitation which constrains workers to be part of a labor pool, a reserve army of workers as unemployed workers, workers who are left in their communities unemployed, workers who are forced to go abroad, to migrate, to work, to suffer in even more harrowing conditions. And of course, this system of exploitation is the one that assures super profits for imperialists, because workers in the semi-colonial countries suffer from even worse wages and forms of exploitation and rape of their environment, their resources, and others. And finally, therefore, workers have to fight for their liberation. National and social liberation, especially for those countries that are subjugated by imperialism, and the workers in the advanced capitalist countries who also fight for social liberation and conduct solidarity. After all, workers everywhere We have nothing else but to remove the chains of bondage. For us, therefore, all workers should uh, should work together beyond the confines of the unions, but also to strengthen the trade unions into militant ones, whether in the industrialized countries, but also in the third world. And there, the workers in the trade unions must work hand in hand in struggle with the rest of the workers in the reserve army. These are the workers who are unemployed or exist as semi-proletariat, in, interim workers who are also forced to go abroad. These should also be work for solidarity between workers and peasants. All of this, with the migrants, therefore, we have to create new forms of organizations that goes beyond the trade unions. Besides building militant trade unions, we have to create worker center that brings together the migrants, the homeless, the indigenous, the agricultural workers, and others. And in this sense, therefore, it is the imperative to, to work, to focus on social change, for social liberation, especially in the countries, the semi-colonial countries. The conditions are ripe to conduct more militant struggles. In these countries, workers are arming themselves in various ways, in defensive struggles, on even struggles that are semi-legal, because workers have to build, to prepare for their liberation. They can only do that as they work, organize, create trade unions, strengthen those trade unions, make them militant, and work together with other workers in the communities, in the rural areas, and also the workers who are dispossessed in their homes and communities. This is the spirit of the Paris Commune. And that's why the Paris Commune is very important, because it signaled the growth of the struggle of the workers all over the world towards building their own power and build socialism. For this, we want to look at the details, the capacities, the needs to strengthen ourselves, and how we use international solidarity to help each other, to organize in every city, in every town, in the rural areas, and together we will change the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antonio Tuhan. That's setting the scene for the inputs now from a range of trade union leaders from different countries and continents. So I remind you again that the speakers have each been allocated 10 minutes for their presentation, and there is interpretation available in the channels provided in the Zoom. Our very first speaker is Amidou Jeju. He is currently the Finance Officer of the Union of Free Teachers of Senegal. That's in West Africa. And he's the Administrative Secretary of the National Confederation of Workers of Senegal. Please welcome Amidou Jeju. He'll be speaking in French, so you'll need your interpretation channel.
Merci beaucoup. C'est bon? I can move now. Je peux y aller là? Je peux y aller?
Please go ahead, Amadou.
I can move. Thanks. Alors, dans un contexte aussi lourd que pesant, marqué par cette pandémie de la COVID qui résiste encore au développement de la science, le mouvement syndical reste plus que jamais interpellé. Le webinaire de ce 9 mai, Perspective des syndicats et des migrants d'Asie, d'Afrique et du Pacifique, pose le débat. Il s'agit en termes très clairs et précis d'aborder la question des défis actuels du mouvement ouvrier posés par la pandémie sur le statut économique et politique des travailleurs, à savoir la situation sanitaire, l'érosion des salaires, la protection sociale, la liberté d'association et l'importance de construire une solidarité internationale de la classe ouvrière. À cet effet, après une revue des effets de la COVID tirée des données de la CSI, nous ferons d'abord une brève présentation de la situation sanitaire du Sénégal. Nous aborderons ensuite la douloureuse situation des érosions des salaires, la lancinante problématique de la protection sociale et des libertés d'association, avant de terminer par l'impérieuse nécessité de bâtir un élan de solidarité internationale de la classe ouvrière. Pour parler des effets de la COVID vus par la CSI, je dirais que les effets de la COVID sur le monde du travail s'accentuent alors que de plus en plus des pays ripostent à la pandémie en adoptant des mesures nationales. La deuxième enquête mondiale sur la COVID que la CSI a menée du 30 mars au 2 avril 2020 auprès de 116 organisations syndicales de 94 pays, dont 17 pays du G20 et 32 de l'OCDE, révèle ces disparités régionales. La dernière analyse de l'Organisation internationale du travail sur les effets catastrophiques de la COVID sur les heures de travail et les revues montre que l'Afrique pourrait perdre 22 millions d'emplois équivalent plein temps. Sur la base d'une semaine de travail de 40 heures, l'Asie-Pacifique pourrait en perdre 150 millions et les Amériques 29 millions. Même si les pays du G20 ont promu une mesure de relance record de 5 000 milliards de dollars US, elle risque de ne pas englober des pays émergents et en développement. La grande majorité des gouvernements, 72% en total, adoptent des mesures pour protéger les salaires et soutenir les revenus. Mais de grandes différences régionales apparaissent. Dans 41% des pays, de telles mesures ne suffisent pas pour couvrir les besoins essentiels. Une situation que l'on retrouve majoritairement dans les pays d'Asie-Pacifique, 64%, et sur le continent américain, 45%. Nous ne pouvons pas nous contenter d'attendre que la pandémie frappe les pays d'Afrique et d'Amérique latine avec la même férocité qu'ailleurs, sans un plan d'action. La CSI appelle à appuyer la création d'un fonds mondial pour une protection sociale universelle en faveur des pays les plus pauvres pour soutenir les soins de santé et des mesures de soutien aux revenus. Et demande que le Fonds monétaire international coordonne les mesures de relance budgétaire, émette des droits de tirage spéciaux, mette en place un fonds fiduciaire permettant aux économies avancées de réallouer leurs avoirs en droits de tirage spéciaux et consacre ce fonds à la santé publique, à la protection sociale et aux emplois. Dans bien des pays, gouvernements, employeurs et syndicats travaillent ensemble pour gérer les répercussions sociales et économiques de la COVID, esquissant ainsi un nouveau contrat social. S'il existe des exemples de bons employeurs qui garantissent les emplois et les revenus pendant 92 jours, soutiennent des chaînes d'approvisionnement et reversent la société, trop d'employeurs abandonnent les travailleurs. Dans 56 pays, 56% des pays, j'allais dire, le sentiment est que les employeurs ne répondent pas comme il se doit aux besoins des travailleurs. C'est sur le continent américain et dans la région Asie-Pacifique que la réponse des employeurs face aux attentes de la main-d'œuvre est la moins bien adoptée. Sur les 67 pays qui ont répondu aux 2 enquêtes, 51% estimaient que les employeurs ne réagissaient pas correctement lors du premier sondage, alors qu'ils sont désormais 61% à partager ce sentiment. Aujourd'hui, l'avertissement de l'OIT est grave, prévoyant une baisse des heures de travail sur la base d'une semaine de travail à temps plein de 40 heures, équivalente à une perte de 230 millions d'emplois à temps plein. Dans le monde, l'avenir s'avance difficile. Ce n'est qu'en travaillant ensemble, grâce au dialogue social entre syndicats, employeurs et gouvernements, et en s'engageant en faveur d'une coordination mondiale, que les gouvernements regagneront la confiance de la population. Tel est le chemin à suivre après la pandémie pour ne laisser personne de côté, a conclu Sharon Barrow. 2, on parle de la situation sanitaire. La situation sanitaire mondiale est dominée depuis décembre 2019 par cette pandémie. Au Sénégal, où nous avons enregistré le premier cas le 2 mars 2020, la situation est à ce jour relativement stable. Le communiqué d'hier fait état de 40 665 cas déclarés positifs, dont 39 335 guéris, 1117 décès, 212 sous traitement. Avec environ 427 377 personnes vaccinées, nous assistons à une baisse du nombre de contaminés par jour et par conséquent du nombre de décès et de cas graves. L'érosion des salaires. La survenue de la COVID a été l'occasion rêvée pour chambouler toutes les attentes. Comme s'ils se sont passés le mot, les salaires connaissent ainsi un coût sacré. À défaut de les annuler, on constatera une baisse qui dépasse par endroit les 50% dans certains secteurs, surtout celui du tourisme et de l'hôtellerie. Devenant ainsi, ici au Sénégal, le président de la République a sorti une ordonnance pour arrêter cette hémorragie financière. Protection sociale. Face à la violence de la pandémie, la protection sociale devient un levier sur lequel il faut actionner pour éviter le pire. Ici, le grand défi reste celui de la protection des emplois existants, mais aussi d'en créer d'autres pour sauver des vies. Il faut également renforcer la santé et la sécurité au travail. L'économie informelle fortement inspire une formalisation. En atteste les libertés d'association. Avec la pandémie, nous assistons à la restriction des libertés, dont celles liées à la liberté d'association. Les travailleurs, soit ils sont interdits de manifester sous prétexte de restrictions sanitaires, soit pour les en empêcher systématiquement la revendication. Enfin, on parle de la solidarité internationale. La pandémie de la maladie à coronavirus exige de nos jours une solidarité internationale. La complexité de ces manifestations impose de bâtir un élan de solidarité qui ne laisse personne ou aucun État de côté. Cela signifie aussi une unité syndicale partout, et ce, par l'entremise de l'OIT. À partir de ce moment où les États et les entreprises sont autant impactés, la solidarité apparaît comme la voie du salut. Au Sénégal, nous avons noté des actes ou actions de solidarité encourageants, à savoir le renforcement de l'unité syndicale à travers la coalition des syndicats, des centrales syndicales sénégalais. Aussi, avec le gouvernement, nous avons connu l'avènement des fonds force Covid à hauteur de 1 000 milliards qui est intervenu dans presque tous les secteurs d'activité. Cette solidarité doit davantage se sentir pour l'acquisition de vaccins, le renforcement des équipements pour faire face aux défis du télétravail de toute autre activité en virtuel. À partir de ce moment, un défi majeur se pose, c'est celui de la solidarité tripartite, État, patronat, travailleurs, par le renforcement du dialogue social pour trouver des consensus forts et faire face aux futures catastrophes sanitaires ou de toute autre nature. Telle est, mesdames et messieurs, camarades syndicalistes, l'économie de ma modeste constitution à ce panel. Je dois rappeler pour terminer, et nous avons été pris au dépourvu parce qu'en prélude, ça devait être le camarade Mustapha qui devait faire cette présentation, qui malheureusement est tombé malade. C'est seulement hier que nous avons été informés de cette présentation et vous comprendrez un peu donc que le contenu de la présentation, son caractère piètre, est lié au fait que nous n'avons pas assez de temps pour faire des recherches assez fouillées, mais justement revenir par rapport aux attentes liées aux défis que nous devions évoquer. Voilà donc, mesdames et messieurs, l'économie de notre présentation. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very, very much, Amidou. I realize you were given very short notice about the presentation because the officer who was going to do it got sick. So I'm sure there'll be some more questions to you about the situation in Senegal and your general point. And thank you very much for keeping to the time limit. Our next speaker is Amelia Yanti Siahan. She's an activist, a labor lawyer, a trade union organizer. Amelia started working in the garment industry in Indonesia at the age of 15 and became involved in the labor movement when she joined a movement, Indonesian labor movement in 1995 during the dictatorship of Suharto. In August 1997, she and other workers founded the Garment and Textile Workers Association of Indonesia, and she was elected the chairperson. Amelia is currently the General Secretary of the Gabungan Serikat Buruh Indonesia, GSBI, or the Federation of Indonesian Trade Unions. So please welcome Amelia Yanti Siahan.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, everyone. I would like to speak in Bahasa for my speakers.
Please go ahead.
Yes. Kondisi buruh dan perjuangan serikat buruh sejati di Indonesia di tengah pandemi COVID-19. Pengalaman GSB. Saya Amelia Yanti, Sekretaris Jenderal GSB.
One moment. Sorry, Amelia.
Yes, yes.
We just paused because your microphone is overwhelming the interpreter. So if the technical team could fix that, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please, Amelia, could you choose the Bahasa channel?
Can I start
Can you
now?
do that, Amelia?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Kondisi buruh dan perjuangan serikat buruh sejati di Indonesia di tengah pandemi COVID-19. Pengalaman GSBI. Saya Amelia Yanti, Sekretaris Jenderal GSBI, menyampaikan terima kasih atas kesempatan yang diberikan pada kami untuk berbagi pengetahuan dan pengalaman tentang kondisi rakyat Indonesia, khususnya kondisi kaum buruh, serta perjuangannya selama COVID-19 di Indonesia. Adalah satu kehormatan luar biasa bagi kami bisa mengekspresikan aspirasi dan kepentingan di momentum peringatan Commune Paris yang sangat bersejarah bagi kaum buruh di seluruh dunia. Istimewanya, peringatan ini dilakukan pada saat kita sama-sama menjadi saksi bahwa dunia yang bisa diciptakan oleh kapitalis monopoli internasional pada akhirnya hanyalah dunia bermasker. Kemana-mana kita harus pakai masker. Dan mereka memaksa kita menyebut ini dunia yang normal. Bila sistem ini terus berkuasa, bukan mustahil ke depan kita akan menemukan diri kita di jalan-jalan, bahkan di rumah, akan berpakaian ala astronot, lengkap dengan pesawat ala ruang angkasanya, untuk mencari jejak air dan oksigen di bumi. Karena perubahan iklim sebentar lagi, air dan oksigen di bumi di bawah imperialisme tinggal sejarah. Untuk itu, GSBI adalah konfederasi serikat buruh dari berbagai jenis produksi secara nasional, konfederasi profesi profesional dan kabupaten, serta berbagai serikat buruh perkebunan dan lokal yang ada di Indonesia. Saat ini sangat mendesak bagi GSBI untuk membangun dan memperluas organisasinya agar dapat mempresentasikan sebaik-baiknya karakter serikat buruh sejati dan militan di tengah dominasi serikat buruh kuning dan tradisional di Indonesia. Bagaimanapun, Aspirasi dan kepentingan mendesak bagi kaum buruh Indonesia saat ini adalah memiliki serikat buruh militan dan sejati sebagai alat perjuangan untuk pembebasan kaum buruh dari sistem kapitalis dan krisisnya. Kaum buruh, bahkan rakyat Indonesia, membutuhkan serikat buruh sejati yang bisa memahami masalah pokok yang dihadapi oleh bangsa dan seluruh rakyat Indonesia, yaitu imperialisme, feodalisme, dan kapitalis birokrat. Serikat buruh yang sungguh paham dan bersedia berjuang untuk mengakhiri 3 masalah tersebut yang telah menciptakan dan memelihara sistem setengah jajahan dan setengah feodal secara kekerasan berbasiskan pada penghisapan setengah feodal atas kaum tani di pedesaan. Konsekuensinya, GSBI sebagai serikat buruh sejati berusaha terus tanpa lelah dan putus asa memberikan pemahaman bahwa syarat bagi pembebasan penuh kaum buruh dari sistem kapitalis di Indonesia, pertama-tama harus mampu memobilisasi seluas-luasnya kaum buruh agar dapat memberikan kepemimpinan kelas bagi kaum tani yang berjuang membebaskan diri dari belenggu sewa tanah dan peribaan melalui land reform sejati di pedesaan. Pada saat ini, pandemi COVID-19 seperti sekarang, negara dan pemerintah Indonesia tidak hanya menunjukkan ketidakmampuannya untuk memerintah, tapi juga memperlihatkan karakter sesungguhnya sebagai negara reaksioner dengan pemerintah boneka yang membebek pada imperialis. Meskipun jelas-jelas tidak berdaya menghadapi dan menangani pandemi COVID-19 serta berbagai masalah ekonomi, politik, dan kebudayaan yang menyertainya. Pemerintahan Joko Widodo tetap bersikeras menunjukkan bahwa dia layak untuk berkuasa dan bisa menyelesaikan masalah rakyat Indonesia yang sangat berat. Selama COVID-19, pemerintahan Joko Widodo kerjanya hanya menekan rakyat dengan peraturan dan aparatur negara bersenjata agar mengikuti semua kebijakan dan protokol kesehatan. Sistem pemeriksaan COVID-19 yang sangat meragukan secara ilmiah, tetapi harus dibayar mahal, pembatasan mobilitas yang sangat menindas, dan vaksinasi yang sangat kontroversial. Negara tidak bisa menjalankan tugas dan tanggung jawabnya untuk melindungi dan menangani kesehatan rakyat. Bertahun-tahun Indonesia hanyalah konsumen obat-obatan dan vaksin imperialis. Sekarang triliunan rupiah dihabiskan untuk mengimpor vaksin 19 dan masih sempat menepuk dada dengan mengatakan pada rakyat bahwa Indonesia adalah negeri yang sukses memvaksin rakyatnya, paling besar setelah Cina dan India. Utang baru yang diciptakan selama penanganan pandemi COVID-19 membengkak sedemikian rupa, termasuk biaya yang dihabiskan untuk impor vaksin, jadi dan bahan baku vaksin yang diproduksi di bawah lisensi di Indonesia. Berkedok program integratif penanganan ekonomi selama pandemi, pemerintahan Joko Widodo mengucurkan dana sangat besar bagi rakyat untuk keperluan politik sendiri, untuk mencegah perjuangan kelas, bukan untuk membebaskan rakyat dari kesulitan ekonomi dan politik. Mereka mengucurkan dana untuk loyalis politik melalui loyaltis politik mereka sendiri, termasuk memperluas impor bahan keperluan hidup, berkedok cadangan dalam menghadapi pandemi COVID-19. Dana yang diperoleh dari impor keperluan hidup selama pandemi sangat besar. Kewajiban pemeriksaan kesehatan dengan biaya sendiri untuk pengguna pesawat terbang dan kereta api, serta berbagai keperluan lainnya adalah cadangan dana politik besar bagi pemerintah yang berkuasa di tingkat pusat dan lokal. Perhatian negara dan pemerintah Indonesia terhadap penghidupan rakyat yang sudah buruk sebelum pandemi semakin menjadi-jadi di era pandemi. Tidak ada gunanya lagi berharap pada bantuan negara yang sangat terbatas, tendensius, bersyarat, dan sangat diskriminatif. Dari hari ke hari, hanya peraturan pembatasan baru yang di tengah para aparatur sipil dan militer tinggi negara tidak mengenal dan terkena aturan pembatasan apapun. Rakyat harus ini, rakyat harus itu. Sementara mereka tidak ada satupun keharusan yang diberlakukan bagi diri mereka. Akibat politik, komoditas pertanian murah untuk ekspor yang semakin intensif, kaum tani penggarap di pedesaan semakin tidak mampu membayar sewa tanah dan tenggelam berkepanjangan dalam hutang lama. Terus menciptakan utang baru hingga kehilangan tanah dan kebebasan sepenuhnya. Tani miskin dan buruh tani yang harus hidup dari menjual tenaga kerjanya secara harian. Beban kerja semakin intensif, syarat hidup semakin lemah. Di tengah harga komoditas yang berubah-ubah dan cenderung menurun, tenaga kerja menumpuk tidak berharga. Dibandingkan dengan kaum tani, kaum buruh tidak lebih baik kondisinya. Sejak awal pandemi COVID-19 dan krisis, karena pandemi belum sedalam dan seluas sekarang, kaum buruh telah menjadi tumbal kaum kapitalis dan negara. Dia harus terus bekerja dengan kekhawatiran luar biasa atas pandemi dan biaya-biaya yang muncul karena pandemi. Dan karena pembatasan-pembatasan diberlakukan secara sepihak dan penuh paksaan. PHK terus berlangsung. Pemutusan kontrak sepihak sementara dan permanen terus berlangsung. Pandemi COVID-19 memberikan alasan kuat bagi kaum kapitalis untuk menentang tuntutan ekonomi kaum buruh. Tuntutan kenaikan upah terlihat tidak relevan dan tidak bisa dipahami di era pandemi. Tuntutan tunjangan hari raya nampak berlebihan. Karena tanpa pandemi pun hanya sebagian kecil kaum kapitalis yang membayar THR berdasarkan peraturan yang berlaku. Pandemi COVID-19 memberikan alasan tambahan bagi kaum kapitalis dan negaranya untuk memberangus serikat buruh dan kebebasan untuk mendesakkan aspirasi dan kepentingan kaum buruh. Tuntutan ekonomi selalu berhadapan dengan halangan politik yang lebih berat dan kuat dari waktu ke waktu. Bahkan aksi kaum buruh harus berhadapan dengan berbagai bentuk tindakan kekerasan, seperti pembubaran paksa dan penangkapan berdasarkan pelanggaran protokol kesehatan. Situasi ini memberikan keuntungan bagi kelas yang berkuasa dan kaum kapitalis secara umum. Di satu sisi, kaum buruh semakin sulit untuk mendesakkan aspirasi dan kepentingannya. Imperialis dan pemerintahan bonekanya di Indonesia memiliki keleluasaan istimewa, tidak terikat oleh pembatasan apapun selama pandemi. Mereka terus berusaha mempercepat implementasi neoliberalisme dengan segala cara, berkedok pemulihan ekonomi rakyat selama pandemi. Undang-Undang Omnibus Cipta Kerja nomor 11 tahun 2020, salah satu peraturan yang sukses ditetapkan untuk meraih utang dan investasi asing lebih besar di satu sisi, dan merampas hak dasar kaum buruh dan kaum tani, serta pekerja lainnya di Indonesia. Serial aksi dan kampanye dilancarkan oleh kaum buruh, bersisian dengan gerakan demokratis lainnya, menentang penetapan undang-undang tersebut. Hingga sekarang kaum buruh terus berusaha agar peraturan tersebut tidak bisa dijalankan dan tidak bisa dijadikan dasar untuk melahirkan peraturan baru, karena pasti meningkatkan derajat pengisapan atas kaum buruh dan rakyat Indonesia. Agar aksi dan kampanye ini dapat terus berlangsung, serikat buruh jadi harus dapat menjadi tulang punggung aksi di perkotaan, bersisian dengan kaum intelektual demokratis, serta kebangkitan kaum tani di pedesaan. Kebebasan politik dan kebudayaan, meskipun terbatas, sangat berharga bagi gerakan rakyat, termasuk bagi serikat buruh sejati. Di tengah pandemi, kebebasan politik harus terus dipertahankan dan diperluas agar kaum buruh dapat membangun dan mengembangkan kekuatannya secara berkelanjutan. Kaum buruh tidak boleh memberikan kesempatan kepada negara reaksi dan kaum kapitalis merampas kebebasan tersebut agar aspirasi dan kepentingannya dapat diperjuangkan. Perjuangan rakyat Myanmar di tengah krisis telah memberikan kekuatan dan inspirasi bagi kami. Bagaimana mahal dan berharganya kebebasan politik. Bahkan mereka harus rela tetap berjuang dan terus berlatih untuk merebut kembali hak demokratisnya di era COVID-19. Kebebasan politik yang telah ditangan tidak boleh dirampas dengan berbagai alasan, termasuk oleh pembatasan karena pandemi COVID-19. Semangat perjuangan rakyat Myanmar memberikan inspirasi nyata bagaimana seharusnya gerakan serikat buruh sejati di Indonesia berjuang bahkan di era pandemi yang ganas dan pembatasan COVID-19 dan tindasan junta yang ganas. Indonesia pernah mengalami situasi yang sama selama rezim Soeharto dan Orde Barunya. Selama gerakan Mei 1998, rakyat Indonesia pernah memperlihatkan kemampuannya bekerja sama, menggalang kekuatan yang sangat luas dan besar untuk menggulingkan Soeharto. Sayang, pada saat kebebasan politik di perkotaan tidak bisa lagi dipertahankan, kekuatan tani dan suku bangsa minoritas yang maju yang bisa membuka jalan untuk bentuk perjuangan yang lebih dikdaya, yang bisa menghilangkan halangan politik yang mustahil disingkirkan dengan perjuangan politik biasa lagi, belum eksis kala itu. Sehingga para aktivis habis-habisan bertarung di perkotaan dengan segala cara, bahkan hingga mengambil bentuk kekerasan karena kefrustasian. Juga selama era tahun 1950 hingga 1565-an yang lalu, gerakan buruh di Indonesia berkembang dengan pesat dan sukses, menggalang seluruh golongan yang terkenal dengan front nasionalis, komunis, dan agama, atau Nasakom. Akan tetapi justru itulah awal mula kehancuran gerakan buruh secara umum. Karena kekuatan perubahan sesungguhnya tidak bangkit, yaitu kaum tani yang dipimpin oleh kaum buruh di pedesaan. Rakyat Myanmar sedang menghadapi situasi itu. Mereka cukup beruntung, memiliki banyak kekuatan cukup maju di pedesaan, yang bersedia menampung para aktivis dari perkotaan pada saat represi junta seperti sekarang. Dan bahkan bersedia melatih mereka secara militer untuk menghadapi junta. Pada akhirnya GSB pun, semua kita harus belajar dan mengambil semangat Commune Paris baik-baiknya. Bahwa peranan kaum buruh sangat diperlukan, tidak saja untuk memperbaiki keadaan hidup, akan tetapi memiliki cita-cita lebih tinggi, mengubah secara fundamental sistem kapitalis monopoli internasional yang berdominasi di seluruh dunia dengan memerosotkan kakinya di berbagai negeri, termasuk mengalahkan sistem setengah jajahan dan setengah feodal, berbasis sosial bagi imperialisme di Indonesia. Kaum buruh harus memiliki cita-cita mengakhiri kekuasaan borjuasi yang terbukti hanya memberikan keuntungan ekonomi bagi kelasnya sendiri. Kelas buruh harus terus belajar untuk berkuasa dan memerintah. Dalam kasus Indonesia, dia harus belajar memerintah bersama-sama dengan kaum tani. Berikutnya dengan kelas yang lainnya yang terbangkitkan, yang sama-sama memiliki kehendak menghancurkan imperialisme, feodalisme, dan kapitalis birokrat di Indonesia. Situasi ini tidak mudah, sekalipun kita harus tetap bersandar pada kemampuan sendiri dalam menuntaskan masalah nasional sebagai prinsip tidak tergantikan dalam gerakan buruh. Tidak berarti gerakan saling membantu antar gerakan rakyat dan gerakan buruh secara regional dan internasional tidak diperlukan. Justru pada saat ini, di bawah imperialisme, gerakan rakyat dari berbagai negeri harus memperkuat gerakan saling membantu tanpa batas. Solidaritas internasional yang sebenar-benarnya dengan berbagai bentuk aktivitas dan lebih maju. Dengan jalan ini, kita bisa memahami bahwa kemajuan gerakan di satu negeri sangat berarti bagi kemajuan gerakan di negara yang lain. GSB sangat konsen untuk memperluas kerjasama antar kaum buruh, antar gerakan buruh sejati secara regional dan internasional, dan sangat terbuka untuk belajar dari pengalaman yang maju dari berbagai gerakan buruh sejati, dari kemenangan dan kekalahan yang berharga dari berbagai negeri. Salam solidaritas internasional. Terima kasih. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Amelia. We had a problem with the interpretation from Bahasa to French. So my apologies, and I hope that the technical team is getting on top of that problem. I'm happy now to introduce our next speaker. This is Mr. Gautam Modi. He's the General Secretary of the New Trade Union Initiative of India. NTUI began in 2001 as a grouping of independent trade unions and was legally federated at a congress in 2006. It has since been steadily developing its base and made some significant progress towards accomplishing its goals of building a more effective trade union federation to meet the challenges of the offensive against the working class under capitalist globalization. It's forming an organization that gives space for the coexistence of multiple progressive political tendencies. So please welcome Gautam Modi.
Thank you, comrades, the ILPS and the KMU for the invitation to join you here today. let me salute the courage of the heroes of the Paris Commune and of every revolution since. I also, on behalf of the NTUI, salute everyone, especially frontline workers who have fallen in the struggle to keep the working class flag flying against the pandemic. Today, I particularly also want to note and the attack that we're seeing on the ongoing attack we're seeing on Palestinians, almost literally as we speak. You know, when I sort of was asked to speak about the Paris Commune in the context of the pandemic, my sense is that we're, of course, living, and in India today, we're at the edge of perhaps the greatest humanitarian tragedy in independent India's history. But we're also living through the greatest attack on the hard-fought gains of not just the right to self-determination, but literally everything that the working class won in India in the last century and a quarter. So in a way, not just the 70 plus years of independence, but what we had won and gained as working class rights in the last 5 decades of colonial rule. There are 3 things which really we take forward from what we learned, what were in a way foundational from the Paris Commune in the century and a half that has followed. First, the very notion of a democratic society. Second, the sharp separation of a progressive society between church and state. And the third, of working class power, worker power, self-rule, self-government, and self-management. We are, and have been for the last several years in India, faced with, as I said, the greatest attack on our democracy. If one thinks about it, that was the biggest gain in our struggle against imperialism. Yes, we had a bourgeois revolution that brought about independence, but what it gave and what it brought was some basic elements of democratic rights for all. And today, we are looking at the reconstruction or rather construction of a new homogeneous religion. Not Hinduism, but Hindutva, as the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party calls it, which is aimed at hegemonizing all of society, suppressing democratic rights, and oppressing the working class and all working people. In a sense, the humanitarian crisis and the attack on the working class we face is at the core of this rise for authoritarianism to build a state built on inequitable, in an understanding that we can be divided, we can be divided between those who belong to a certain faith and those who don't. In the course of the last year, we've seen the single greatest attack on the working class in terms of virtual writing down of our existing labor rights and replacing the laws that allowed us to form unions, that allowed us to engage in collective bargaining, that determined our minimum wage and determined basic but very limited social security, all of which are today being trampled upon in under the banner of globalization, under the banner of efficiency, under the banner of putting away the old and opening up the new, but most of all, really paving the way for the further cheapening of labor, the further loss of production of workers' rights, and most of all, the complete erosion of health and safety in the workplace. These changes have been proposed on and off for nearly 30 years now, but they were muscled through in the course of the last year, in September 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, with a truncated sitting of the Indian Parliament, without allowing debate. It's not just an attack on the working, as I said, not just an attack on the working class, it's an attack on all working people. There's been a significant change in the laws that govern farmer markets or the markets for agricultural produce, which undermines especially middle farmers and small farmers who till their land on their own. That would, of course, then go on to undermine the lives and livelihoods of countless agricultural workers who are dependent on the land. These together mark a dramatic shift in the way the Indian economy is constructed, strongly in favor of a private sector that is not accountable in any way. And as I turn to the pandemic, not accountable because it not just seeks to be part of a profit system, what it really seeks is to be part of a rent system. Today, right here in the city of Delhi, you can at a premium price pay for a hospital bed. At a premium price, you can get yourself into an intensive care unit with a ventilator. You need to pay a bribe to a private ambulance operator. And to get an oxygen cylinder filled, you need to pay 10 times the standard price of what it costs to get an oxygen cylinder filled. If indeed the pandemic is the result of human society crossing the line with nature, a year down the road, there can be no ambiguity that this is a humanitarian crisis caused by a government that sought to virtually hand over the economy to the private sector in the midst of a pandemic, ran down public health care and every other public service, literally in the course of the last year, preparing for a vast exercise of privatization, believing that this was the opportune moment, this was the time the trade union and the working class movement are at their weakest, when they're unable to mobilize, when they will not be able to come on to the street for the pandemic, because of the pandemic. It was built on the myth of our capacity to be a self-reliant country, to determine our own policies, on a myth of being the pharmacy to the world, when in fact what we really do have is only contract manufacturers to global giants. It was built on the myth of the fact that we had a strong and robust relationship with the United States and its allies. Every one of these myths has crumbled in the course of the last 3 months. And today, we are finally on the cusp, as I said, of a humanitarian crisis, which can only be reversed by the working class taking power, by the working class providing leadership, by the working class building solidarity, both across communities and across the country and across the world. by bringing to its knees a government, moving forces to be able to provide an opportunity where the working class can win back its rights, wrest control of democratic rights, wrest control of worker rights, in order to gain ground, to advance its energy, advance its forces for social change. Today, in all honesty, we are, as a progressive movement, faced with the challenge of survival. We face an attack which seeks to annihilate us. And it seeks to annihilate us because what the far right in India recognizes is that their most important challenger is those who advance the idea of progress, those who advance the idea of the scientific revolution, those who fight irrationality, those who fight myths and fake news. And they recognize that the single biggest vehicle for advancing the idea of progress is in fact the working class movement and its trade unions. And hence this attack on us. This is a moment where we absolutely must stand up, and we will, and we believe, just as we have come together, we will stand up together, not just here in India, but we'll stand up together across the world. All of us united with one purpose, one energy, to turn our back to imperialism, to push back imperialism, and to take control, taking the lessons of the Paris Commune forward.
Thank you very, very much, Comrade Gautam. I'm sure this will provoke a lot of questions about the situation you're facing there in India and these ideas for the global solidarity movement. Right now, because I think the situation in India is so challenging and so tragic, we want to show in a cultural way also our solidarity. So there's a video now.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. शांति चारों ओर एक दीप ओ मन में है विश्वास पूरा है विश्वास हम होंगे कामयाब एक दिन Jitkaro kabun, jitkaro kabun, jitkaro kabun, nikti. Inak mo neong turkon, pakyamina ang jitkaro kabun jawi. Sausonge puntarama, sausonge puntarama, sausonge puntaram jawi. Inak mo neong turkon, patyamina ang jitkaro kabun nikti. Piska love vina, piska love vina, piska come frem entar. Och tittin i mig, stole jag på. Vi ska komma frem entar. Vi går hand i hand, vi går hand i hand, vi går hand i hand en dag. Och djupt in i mig stole jag på. Vi går hand i hand en dag. Jitkaro kabun jawi. हम होंगे कामयाब एक दिन. We shall overcome someday. Vi går hand i hand en dag.
Thank you very much for the team that developed that video. We shall overcome, drawing on the history we have in the working class movement from even before the Paris Commune, but especially because we're focusing on that tonight. And as Comrade Gautam said, all of the revolutions since as well. Can I now invite our next speaker? This is Dennis Marga. He's the first New Zealander of Asian descent to lead a major trade union in that country. He's the General Secretary of First Union, one of the country's largest private sector unions. He helped found or establish Migrante Aotearoa New Zealand, and in 2012, the Union Network of Migrants, the migrant workers section of First Union. So please welcome Dennis Marga.
Kyoto Koto Katawa, ko Dennis Magaaho, Talupalaba, Malulale, Bula, greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and from the Pacific. The video that just we watched was really powerful, and it's really actually close to us because within our union, we have a lot of Indian workers as well. My discussion for today, in line with this theme, is actually to discuss also about the future that works, because as of now, many bourgeoisie have been actually discussing about future of work. But the question is that, are we part of that future? Now, it's becoming a cliche, but it's still worth reminding ourselves that we live through unprecedented times. By going hard and early, the team of 5 million New Zealanders became the envy of the world. But we also know we'll be living with a COVID economic crisis for at least the next decade. To put it bluntly, New Zealand workers have just endured the biggest full frontal assault on our jobs, our wages and conditions, and our fundamental rights in history. As a result of the level 4 lockdown in New Zealand, the economy declined 12.2% in the second quarter of 2020, the largest single quarterly decline on record. This was matched with the largest quarterly decrease in paid hours in New Zealand history. From July to September, there were 37,000 new unemployed workers across the country, an increase that disproportionately affects women, Maori, Pacifica, and migrant workers, also the largest single quarter increase in New Zealand history. A September 2020 government survey showed almost 60% of workers thought there was a chance that they could lose their jobs in the next 12 months, while 5.8% of workers felt it was almost certain. Unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures. New Zealanders have just elected the most worker-friendly government in half a century. And we've developed a campaign to match that level of ambition. As the new government was sworn in, we called on them to build a future that works for the masses. The first pillar of our future that works is livable income. For decades, inequality in New Zealand has grown apace, and workers have not been delivered the fruits of their labor. Pre-COVID data suggested that the median adult wealth of the top 1% in New Zealand is $6.2 million, while the average New Zealander is worth only $92,000, which is 68 times less. The average New Zealander in the bottom half of the country had a net worth of only $12,000, 533 times less. The wealthiest 1% had squared away $141 billion trust, mostly to avoid tax, while workers pay tax on their income and good service tax whenever they shop. The COVID economic crisis is set to magnify this inequality. Even with the New Zealand government's temporary COVID relief payments, growing unemployment will smash incomes and pressure wages and conditions. As an OECD country, an average wage, New Zealand is falling behind amongst OECD countries. That's why here we want the new government to progress legislation on fair pay agreements, or we can also say that an industry standard agreement to keep increasing minimum wages and to bring up benefit levels in line with recommendations made by the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, which First Union was part of. The second pillar of a future that works is to increase worker power through industrial reforms. That means a stronger collective bargaining framework, rules that encourage workers to join unions, and an end to sham contracting and competitive contracting that drive down working conditions. Workers need a real voice in decisions that affect them at work. It was apparent during the lockdown that some companies were making serious decisions without even consulting the people who were impacted, and that's not okay. Ensuring that working people do not feel pressure to come into work sick is vital to creating a culture where everyone's well-being is valued. And having a strong union presence in the workplace helps to create a positive environment for workers. A future that works also means full employment. We know that for some, the COVID crisis has been a brutal opportunity for profiteering. Companies have taken millions in wage subsidies and then passed the benefits on their shareholders while giving workers the cold shoulder. First Union has already assisted hundreds of workers that have been made redundant as the company cynically exploited the crisis to impose changes to their business model and attack union membership. First Union's redundancy support team is prepared to assist hundreds of more workers affected by COVID-related redundancies and termination, ensuring workers have access to social services and can get back into decent work as soon as practicable. Crucially, this includes migrant workers, a special sector where we successfully pressure the government to trigger Section 64 of the Social Security Act to provide financial support for migrant workers who were made redundant. Remember, trade unions are in the business of protecting all workers, not just their members. This is why trade unions fight for equality, for decent work for all, for social protection, and against child labor or forced labor, although not all these workers will be union members. This is because trade unions care for society as a whole, and of course, the higher their membership, the higher their capacity to influence. We know New Zealand government and the private sector can create enough jobs or hours to keep everybody employed, and workers shouldn't need to work multiple jobs to make up a 40-hour week. In this regard, we support the reestablishment of a Ministry of Works that can directly hire workers to address our national infrastructure deficit. And with interest rates heading towards the negative, there has never been a better time to borrow and invest in our future. There is so much work to be done, building decent housing, climate proofing our economy, and fixing the gaps in our public services. It is a matter of political will. And of course, a future that works means affordable housing for the masses. The New Zealand housing crisis sits at the core of the inequality picture. Housing in New Zealand's major centers consistently ranks amongst the least affordable on the planet. And for most workers, the cost of rent or mortgage payments is growing much faster than their wages. The Reserve Bank own research indicates that the $150 billion it created to keep mortgage rates low could push up house prices by 20 to 30%, keeping home ownership out of reach for many working people. Additionally, throwing money into the housing bubble starves the actual economy of the investment required to build new jobs. In 2020, New Zealand government implemented a COVID rent freeze. However, it's now over, and landlords are not holding back, trying to recoup in rent the costs required for complying with new regulation that requires them to maintain healthy and dry rentals. Addressing this properly will require a massive state housing build of energy-efficient homes for workers, new rights and protections for tenants, and returning to the question addressing tax inequality in this country. If New Zealanders don't confront those fundamental questions of economic crisis, there will be a major upward transfer of wealth. New Zealanders overwhelmingly agree with this proposition, rejecting the politics of greed and division favoring politics of solidarity and kindness. We are proud to see a progressive government elected, especially one that looks so much like the trade union movement it's there to represent. More than half of both Labour and Green MPs are women, 16 Labour MPs are Maori, and there are 5 Maori in cabinet. There are more migrant voices than ever, as well as more LGBTQI member of parliaments. However, it has its limitation. It still operates within the framework of neoliberalism. Thus, the workers' movement must remain vigilant. That's why from day one, we keep the fire burning and we're challenging the government to walk the talk and to create a future that works for the people. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dennis. I think, again, there'll be lots of questions. And I'd like to say before I introduce the final speakers on the panel, that those who have questions, I think I said initially use the chat, but I think you should use the Q&A in the Zoom, and you should use the comments on Facebook if you're watching on the Facebook stream. So we're doing well on the time. I'd like to say we would end on the hour, but it's going to allow us some more time for the questions than was in the original program, I think. But now I will introduce the final panel speakers. It's two people, Ira Pollock and Jonathan Bailey. They are from Amazonians United. Ira is a shop floor organizer and co-founder of the Amazonians United New York City, a movement of low-wage Amazon logistics workers. His organizing focuses on developing working-class leadership in the struggle for a better world. He works in an Amazon delivery station in Queens, in New York City. Jonathan Bailey is a labor, housing and electoral activist in Queens, New York, fighting for worker liberation on Amazon's shop floor. As a co-founder of Amazonians United NYC, he focuses on anti-colonialism and fights to ensure Black and brown people can benefit from the growing workers' movements. So I'm handing over to you, Ira and Jonathan. Let's go.
Hey, we'd like to thank the International League of People Struggles and these exceptional panelists for having us. It's an honor to be here. My name is Jonathan Bailey, and I'm here with Ira Pollock. We're co-founders of Amazonians United NYC. We, as Amazonians United, we started in Chicago and then eventually spread to California and now here to New York City. We look forward to growing in other cities as well. I'm going to hand it off to Ira to start us off with a discussion about the Paris Commune.
Thank you, Jonathan. And that's right. Thank you so much for having us on this panel. I'll actually return to the topic of the Paris Commune shortly. I want to talk a little bit about the context of labor organizing in the United States. The first thing to note is how successfully the capitalist class here has depoliticized the workers' struggle, how much they've separated the labor movement from the political struggle for socialism. The second thing to note is that in the US, workers are in the core of empire. The US is the world's foremost imperial power, so workers here are in the belly of the beast. So in regards to the first of these, the workers' struggle in the US has been separated for many decades from any political struggle for worker self-determination in any political form. This goes back to the Red Scares, where red unions were purged from the labor movement, socialists were purged from the remaining unions. Laws were enacted to prevent political strikes for any political demands, or solidarity strikes, workers at one place striking in solidarity with workers at another. And it's been very successful at separating the political movement for worker self-determination on one hand and the economic movement of the shop floor struggle or the union movement on the other. On that second point about the US workers being in the core of empire, it really means that we have the very important task of fighting national chauvinism that has long plagued the US workers movement. International solidarity for workers in the US is very important. It also means, though, that anti-imperialism here means looking as well at internally colonized people. The US is not unique, but it is very notable in how intensely it has internally colonized many people, particularly the Black communities. And so anti-imperialism in our organizing, it also means making sure that we are taking account for the situation of migrant workers, we're taking account for the situation of Black workers, And the liberation of workers entails really paying close attention to struggles of oppression that affect many workers also outside of the workplace. So the Paris Commune, in the context of looking at how things are in the US, well, the Paris Commune was the first time in history where the working class took political power into its own hands and took self-determination into its own hands and enacted new political institutions for governing society. And we need to take that model in the US and look at the working movement as having a trajectory to point beyond capitalism, not just for bread and butter issues on the shop floor, but for a better future. We need to reroute socialism in working class life, and we need to carry that through. The second thing is the communards came from many different oppressed nationalities throughout Europe. There were Poles, there were workers from all over outside the French, outside Paris. We need to take that to heart here as well, that this workers' movement needs to include and it needs to empower workers of all nationalities. The capitalist world is a lot bigger today, but so is the working class. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jonathan, and he'll talk a little bit about particularly how Amazonians United's struggle in the US has really focused during the pandemic on sort of these questions of internally colonized people.
Hey y'all. So Amazon warehouses in the US are powered by the labor of Black and brown folks. The lack of organization within our communities has enabled the capitalist class to get away with stealing from workers, like in our warehouse, and ignoring demands for change. In New York City, Amazon was able to steal sick leave from workers for months until we organized to push back. This organization prepared us for when Amazon tried to hide the first instance of COVID-19 in a US warehouse, though. We were able to call for a strike and conduct walkouts. But because of the weakness of US workers, of our movement here, and the racialized context of labor in the US, this resulted in a few specific consequences. First, Amazon was able to fire other or otherwise disciplined workers who were the most vocal demanding safety measures. Amazon was also initially successful at dividing the workforce. They began providing unlimited unpaid time off for those who couldn't risk coming into work, and at the same time, we're able to get thousands of new workers to join its workforce with a temporary $2 raise, with a temporary hazard pay, as well as paying double in overtime. Then they suddenly cut that option of being away from work off for the folks who weren't able to come to work, forcing folks to come back, or creating the ability for Amazon to fire those workers. This is kind of how they went about taking advantage of the situation of the virus, and take advantage of the lack of organization of workers here in the US. After that, though, we conducted a series of walkouts, and another way in which the struggle manifests itself was in specific treatment. So for after one of our walkouts, I was pulled into a room and interrogated not just by a member of management, but by a former FBI officer. For those who aren't aware, Amazon regularly hires federal officers, policemen, military personnel, and recently recruited a chief of one of the federal government's main surveillance agencies to its board of directors. As the head of the NSA, this man carried out mass surveillance on people's online communications. Amazon does this to boost its ability of cracking down on workers' resistance. Shortly after our walkouts, it also recruited an ex-Israeli Special Forces operative to be our shift manager. Amazon leverages government training in these fields to destabilize solidarity, interrogate workers, and conduct mass surveillance on worker activity. So we can see, you know, Amazon's labor relations today. If you look, you know, at the history of labor relations in the U.S., really you can see that, like, you can really see the history of U.S. labor relations all the way back to chattel slavery. You can see, like, the way in which Amazon takes advantage of a racialized workforce. You can see the relationship between government and the way that they'll use government and these various like militant institutions and leveraging them against the workforce. So this, like, contextualizes our fight and shows its ramifications are beyond workplace demands. Organizing within Amazon holds the potential for reestablishing a robust political movement in the United States that is rooted in the Black and brown working class. There's this nature of our organizing that just by fighting for workers' liberation, you know, we're connected to these broader political demands. One's for police accountability, one's for you know, liberation from like police dominance over our lives. So while building this capacity amongst colonized people in the US, we hope to strengthen solidarity with colonized people across the world by rebuilding our movement filled with people who share these interests in the fight against colonialism. And with that, we want to thank y'all so much for inviting us to come and chat, and look forward to you know, looking forward to working with y'all and building ties of solidarity across the world with y'all.
Thank you very much, Jonathan and Ira. It's been great to hear the story of what you've been really doing in this last period and how that huge corporation actually tries to divide and dominate. So now we are in the time for an open forum. I've got a question in the Q&A box, and I've also had a hand up from Rafael Mariano. I don't know if Kapayeng, if you can turn on your microphone and talk. Otherwise, you're going to have to put the question or your comment into the chat. But you're first, if we can do that. Okay. Maybe you can put the question into the chat then. The one question I have is from Jerome Adonis. What is the current task of the Indian trade union movement to surpass the current pandemic? How are the calls for aid to the basic sectors, wages and other benefits being carried out under a very difficult situation under Modi? And Amidou is saying he'd like to answer this question live. I think this may be also a question, first of all, directed to Gautam Modi. Please go ahead, Gautam.
Right, for losing valuable minutes. The situation of the pandemic at this point unambiguously requires a lockdown, and the strictest possible lockdown. A lockdown that is called by the national government and paid for by the national government. Today we have 24 lockdowns called by separate states, and each of them are running into one another. The lockdown must be accompanied by a guaranteed supply of food. It must be accompanied with a payment of the minimum wage to every family on a weekly basis. It must be accompanied with as full protection as possible for frontline and emergency workers. And of course, medical services must be made available to all free of charge. If necessary, the military should be deployed, or rather it's very clear that the government cannot handle it, that of course the entire private medical system needs to be brought on board, but the military must be brought on board to be able to deliver these services in terms of setting up temporary hospitals, ensuring the supply of oxygen, distribution of medicine. And finally, we need to work with manufacturers. India has laws in which production capacity can be taken over by government, necessary pharmaceutical capacity to produce the vaccines on a scale that are then delivered so that people can be vaccinated. The vaccine also must be delivered at free of charge to all people. I mean, I think these are immediate demands that need to go with it. Along with that, we would seek that the laws that were changed in September 2020, both for workers' rights and on farmers' markets, be put in abeyance. And finally, our demand would be that once we can bring the pandemic under control, the country go to national general elections to decide whether those in government are fit to govern or not. I think these are the immediate and short-term demands that we would articulate. Let me also add, I mean, there's no indication that the national government has any intention of stepping in. They understand that the unplanned lockdown, literally called at a few hours' notice 13 months ago, had catastrophic consequences. So they don't want to bear the criticism for it. They clearly can see that there's a humanitarian crisis and there's an enormous amount of anger today, which actually did not exist 13 months ago. But they hope that they can ride it out. They can ride it out through divisions, by dividing people. We have a young ruling party member of parliament actually saying that people of the Hindu religion are dying because people of Islamic faith have captured all the hospital beds. So there is a constant effort to try and bring religion into this. And if I go back to the separation of the church and the state, I think in a way here in India, we really need to revisit that, given the manner in which there's an effort to create a new theocracy in order to capture the state. I think post the pandemic, we would need a program of national reconstruction, of ensuring people get jobs, ensuring that productive forces of the economy are put back in place and built upon. These are medium and long-term steps, but I think first we have to have government step in to show that it stands up to fight the pandemic, because most of all today, there's fear and there's despair.
Thank you very much, Gautam. Does Amidou wish to make a reply, a comment on this? Okay, I'll go to another question for you, Gautam, first. Has there been efforts to organize the internal migrant workers in India? They have been part of those most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you want to comment on that?
And I think unions, including ours, are organizing migrant workers all the time. And there is no doubt that they were affected. I mean, I think we should address the fact that all workers were affected. It's a question of where they were in the hierarchy within the working class. The worst off workers were affected, be they migrant workers or be they workers in urban centers who are at the absolute bottom. We would not like to make a distinction between migrant and non-migrant workers. That said, yes, we aggressively unionize migrant workers because we believe that migrant workers are the product of the economic policies that have been, the policies of imperialist globalization that have been pursued, of degrading the countryside to be able to constantly generate a large pool of surplus labor, which then comes into the cities to undercut the wage. As brazen as that, we believe we have an important role to play in that, in getting them on board, getting them into unions. But this is a very large country. The surplus labor force is bigger than the population of most countries. It's almost the surplus labor force is almost the size of Brazil. So this is organizing not just migrant workers, but also agricultural workers and foreign workers. These are in a way twin objectives, because unless we unite, can organize them in their villages, it's very difficult to pin them down in the cities where they're pushed around from one employer to another, one labor broker to another.
Thank you very much, Comrade Gautam. There's a question for Dennis Marga. It's that there are many seasonal farm workers in New Zealand. Do you also organize them?
The short answer to that one is yes. However, they are very difficult to organize because they can only stay in New Zealand for a short-term period. Let's say that the longest one will be 6 months. But we are making some arrangement and agreement with the governments, like we are negotiating with the state itself how we can actually prolong the stay in New Zealand, or if ever they go back to Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji, they will be able to come back again once they join the union, because the understanding is that those countries in the Pacific, they do have a different arrangement as well. And once they join the union, they're also using the employer's influence in order for them to resign from the union or otherwise remove themselves from that situation in order for them to avail another contract to work in New Zealand. So it's a difficult situation for us, but I think the way we can actually organize them is by ensuring that we are working with trade unions in the Pacific. So we are doing it closely now with Fijian trade unions and Samoan trade union.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Malik from CNTS, do you have a question? Are you there, Malik? Okay. I've got my own question. I noticed that when Amelia was presenting and she reported on the passage of the omnibus law, which impacted on the workers in Indonesia, it's virtually happening at the same time as the law was changed in India, with such big consequences for the workers and farmers in India. So has there been any international level coordination about this type of thing happening? And is there some scope for us, even at the ILPS level, to take some kind of connected initiative to focus international attention on this really big attack on the workers? So that's a question to either Amelia or Gautam or both. You need to unmute yourself, please, Amelia.
Okay. Yes. I will try to answering but in bahasa. Ya, sejak Joko Widodo, Presiden Indonesia, memperkenalkan satu instrumen baru, omnibus, pada pelantikan, pada pidato politik pelantikan dia, pelantikan kemenangan dia kedua sebagai presiden. Kami GSBI terkhususnya dengan gerakan rakyat di berbagai sektor itu berupaya untuk membangun aliansi karena kami meyakini bahwa undang-undang ini itu akan menjadi satu instrumen yang dipakai oleh Jokowi itu semakin mengintensifkan penindasannya terhadap rakyat, terkhususnya kepada kaum buruh, karena instrumen ini betul-betul merampas hak-hak dasar, hak-hak demokratis buruh, baik itu dalam upah, ya, di mana undang-undang omnibus ini itu menjadi efektif bagi pemerintahan Jokowi itu untuk menekan kenaikan upah buruh. Begitu juga dalam jaminan pekerjaan, di mana undang-undang omnibus law ini itu semakin meniadakan jaminan bagi buruh untuk bisa mendapatkan pekerjaan yang lebih lama, ya, di mana kontrak itu semakin diperluas dan periode atau waktu kontraknya juga semakin diperpanjang. Di semua sektor itu boleh melakukan, semua sektor, semua sifat pekerjaan itu boleh menggunakan atau menerapkan sistem kerja kontrak, outsourcing dan sebagainya. Nah, dari sejak awal kami GSBI bersama menggagas juga tentu saja dengan aliansi sektoral dan juga melalui Front Perjuangan Rakyat sebagai aliansi multisektoral yang di mana kami bergabung, juga sama bagaimana terus mempropagandakan supaya semua sektor punya kesadaran yang sama itu untuk melawan rencana pemerintahan Jokowi itu untuk meloloskan. Namun pemerintahan Jokowi bersama dengan partai politik pendukungnya itu memanfaatkan situasi pandemi COVID ketika semua rakyat dipaksa untuk bekerja di rumah, dipaksa untuk tetap tinggal di rumah dengan membatasi ruang-ruang sosial. Para parlemen dari partai-partai politik pendukung Jokowi itu terus membahas membahas Omnibus Law, gitu. Sehingga pemerintahan Jokowi dengan partai politik pendukungnya itu mudah ya, dengan mudah itu kemudian bisa meloloskan ini. Namun demikian kami tetap terus melakukan perlawanan, ya, perlawanan implementasi atau pelaksanaan dari Undang-Undang Omnibus Law ini, termasuk juga peraturan turunannya, gitu. Karena kami karena kaum buruh saat ini sudah mulai merasakan dampak terburuk dari Omnibus Law ini, dan kami yakin juga hal yang sama juga terjadi di sektor-sektor yang lain, terkhususnya adalah kaum tani ataupun juga suku bangsa minoritas, masyarakat adat, yaitu. Dan ini perlu satu kerja keras dan terus-menerus yang harus dilakukan oleh kami ya sebagai serikat buruh yang berkarakter sejati, dan juga kami yakin gerakan demokratis lainnya, termasuk juga gerakan tani di pedesaan, gerakan intelektual di perkotaan juga sejalan dengan kami. Dan pada masanya juga, pada waktunya nanti kami yakin bahwa kita akan bisa menyatukan kekuatan kita, karena kami menyadari bahwa gerakan buruh maupun juga gerakan tani itu tidak bisa berjuang sendiri-sendiri, ya, harus membangun ada satu persatuan di seluruh sektor, di seluruh gerakan di berbagai sektor di Indonesia. Ya, Peter.
Thank you very much, Amelia. Thank you. Gautam, do you want to comment at all on this point?
Very, very briefly. I mean, we have received generous solidarity from many of you, from the KMU and from other unions who are not in this room. Coming together, I think, with the GSBI and the Indonesian struggle, I believe will strengthen our respective movements. I can see there are only a few minutes to go in this program, so it would be good if we had a quick conversation with them, either with KMU present or the ILPS. We would very much welcome that, and we look forward to that. That's a message I certainly will take back to my comrades at the end of the webinar.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gautam. Antonio Tuhan also want to comment on this one. So go ahead, please, TJ.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, we have noticed over the years through our research that indeed there is international coordination among in the bourgeoisie in the world today and in the past. The international coordination is used through the leadership of the imperialist powers who lead the World Bank, the WTO, the multilateral banks. And this system operates through the transnational corporations actually submit proposals to the World Bank and the ADB and the pertinent institutions. And there we have found before, by one example, for example, we were fighting the question of the mining acts. We had a new act that was unbelievable in character that was being implemented in the Philippines. And so it resulted in a big campaign against mining. It was going to consolidate mining claims and the entry of transnational corporations in mining in the Philippines. We found out later, only later, after 6 months, that there was a World Bank agreement that implemented neoliberal impositions on mining in 53 countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Meaning to say, there was a World Bank directive that was pushing governments to implement neoliberal impositions to open mining for more TNC exploitation. We also found in 10 years ago that they now implemented a new stream of promotion of dams through the World Bank and the WTO. And as a result, you find now all forms of dam projects all over the world. So the question of labor flexibilization is an issue in the World Bank. That includes also the ADB. India is heavily influenced by ADB, not by the World Bank. But at the same time, Indonesia is influenced by the World Bank and ADB policies, and these coordinate. So it will be no wonder that we will find an agreement that is an international agreement to promote labor flexibilization across these countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I have one more question, and then we would go to the wrapping up part. So one question got answered online. Okay, here's a comment from Len Cooper. Thank you all for the very stimulating and very important analysis aimed at advancing the workers' movement. Len is from the Communication Workers Union Victoria, Australia, and he's also the global chairperson of International Legal People Struggle. He says, thank you for all your hard work. I also want to thank the entire panel, especially Kara and Dania from KMU and ILPS, who did a lot of the organizing work. I want to thank all of our speakers who gave such excellent presentations to this session. And I want to thank the interpreters who did struggle to get the information to everybody. And thank you very much for coping with the situation there. I want to announce that another webinar related to the Paris Commune anniversary is coming up. This one is Women and the Paris Commune, May 22, 9 p.m. Hong Kong time. So there should be publicity from ILPS to all of you about this. So I want to say how 150 years of working class struggle since the Commune has seen incredible tumult in the world, amazing victories and some terrible setbacks for the people's movements and for the working class. But we are in that struggle now, and I'm very happy that ILPS has been able to build unity in this moment. I urge you all to do your best to use the mechanism of ILPS to strengthen our movement, and hopefully more organizations will join it. And the Commission 5 on workers' concerns of ILPS is principally the one helping organize tonight. And we really want to get more trade unions to join ILPS and work through Commission 5 as well. The next thing on our agenda is a photo shoot of the participants. So I'd like to ask everybody to turn on their camera, turn on their microphone, hold up a sign if you want, but we would like to chant in your languages, "Workers of the World Unite." So we should have English, French, and Bahasa Indonesia, at least for the chanting. Thanks again to everybody.
Peter, we just have to wait for a while.
Yeah.
We are to
Merci
be
à toi, Peter.
this to the panelists.
Yeah. So please wait a little bit, everybody, till this is set up by the technical people.
While we set up for the technical matters, can we also read the question for the Amazon United workers?
Okay, this question disappeared. Okay, here it is. I found it. Someone seemed to have said they answered it. But the question is from Azra. Recently, Amazon announced that they will start in Pakistan. And the government of Pakistan is proud about this and saying that Amazon would bring a major new job creation and new opportunities, especially for youth. How can we propagate and sensitize that this will bring more economic atrocities for Pakistani youth? So this is back to you, Ira and Jonathan.
Well, the government always tries to sell big mega projects as job creators. It will create many jobs. Those jobs will probably replace higher paid jobs with more security. It will probably replace union jobs. In the United States, Amazon is rapidly taking over the logistics sector, which is one of the few strongholds of union density in the US. So Amazon is creating jobs, but it's also killing jobs in the process. It's creating opportunity, but it's killing opportunity in the process. And it's creating a great deal of labor flexibility and dispossession of high-paid union jobs with pensions. That's how it's been in the US. It creates some jobs at the expense of much better jobs. It also feeds extreme amounts of dispossession in the form of gentrification. Everywhere Amazon comes, we see neighborhoods radically change, and they don't change for the better. The benefits tend not to accrue to the people who already live there. They tend to accrue to rich consumers, and that's generally who Amazon prioritizes.
Okay, any other comment on that one, Jonathan? You're cool?
I mean, that's pretty detailed. The big opportunity for us here is as Amazonians United is the U.S. representative to Amazon Workers International, which is our international organization for Amazon workers. The goal for us is to continually rope more and more workers across the world into our network so that we can exercise solidarity and conduct actions together and really work towards building a global movement for workers, and in the process of that become really skilled at coordinating worldwide for our fight for workers' liberation.
Okay, so the Amazon struggle is going to Pakistan, that's for sure. Okay, so those participants who are following on Facebook Live, we also urge you to put in the comments something about Workers of the World Unite. Are we ready, the tech team, for this part?
Yes. Yes.
So
can everyone turn on their videos?
And their microphone.
Yes.
So Kara, you give the word.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. Sorry.
Oh. There's a lot of noise in the background there. Okay, that's because all the mics are open. So, shall we go? Workers of the world, unite.
United.
Workers of the world,
United.
Lavoratori di tutto il mondo,
unitevi.
unite.
Workers
Workers
of
of
the
the world,
unite.
Travailleurs de
workers
Workers
of the world,
Lavoratori di tutto il mondo, unitevi.
Nous avons besoin de cette unité, cette forte solidarité pour gagner les prochains combats.
Merci
Lavoratori di tutto il
beaucoup.
mondo, unitevi.
Merci beaucoup, Amidou, Malik.
Terima kasih, Amelia.
Ya. Welcome.
Maraming
Salamat,
salamat
Gara.
po sa lahat sa Philippines, sa Hong Kong.
Mabuhay.
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 Mabuhay ang
Thank you.
manggagawa.
Baka.
Thank you everyone for joining us.
Maki baka.
Wag matakot.
Baka. Wag matakot.
Okay, that's it, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye-bye.
Peter,
Yeah,
thanks for all
okay, thank you.
the
Got a lot of
interpret.
work to do, guys. Yeah.
Okay.
Mama, Ami,
Thanks everyone for joining us, to all
Thanks.
our panelists and
Thanks a lot.
attendees. Thank you very much.
merci à toi, Maman.
Good to see you, Malik.
Okay.
Thanks to you for all the work.
Peter,
Okay.
Emilia.
Amidou, merci beaucoup.
Ah, c'est moi
Okay.
qui te remercie, mon très cher.
Bye-bye.
Yes, on est avec toi.
Hi there,
Thank
Asra.
you.
Thank you.
Merci, au revoir.
Bye.
Bye, bye.
Okay,